All right, let's get started. Let me introduce myself quickly, and I'll request our panelists today to introduce themselves as well. I'm Vetri Vellore. I am the founder and CEO of Ally. I was with Microsoft for 14 years, and then I did a startup before Ally, and now I'm at Ally. Been a huge fan of frameworks like OKRs and how they can actually help organizations to achieve better alignment and accelerate business performance. With me today, I have two amazing panelists, Leah Bateman from Gaming Innovation Group. I'm going to ask Leah to introduce herself.
Hi, yes, happy to be here today. My name is Leah. As Vetri stated, from Gaming Innovation Group, currently a training and development specialist, where I've helped GIG implement OKRs and Ally. Prior to this job, I was working in a very different industry with Nestle Purina, so pet food manufacturing to tech, and I've been involved in both organizations in helping with annual planning, goal setting, and performance management. So happy to be here today.
Thank you, Leah. And then we also have Rakesh, who is the VP of Revenue at Human Interest, very seasoned leader. He was also at Microsoft in his past. I'm gonna request him to introduce himself too.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Vetri, for having me. Human Interest, I run our revenue team, so that's partnership, sales, and implementation. Prior to this was at a startup called Smartsheet, where I ran global partnerships for 2 years. And then prior to that, a lot of big company experience at T-Mobile, British Telecom in the UK, and then a big mobile operator in India as well. So quite a varied experience.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your time, both of you. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. We do have already several questions from the attendees. I will kick it off with a couple of questions, then I'll try to weave in questions from the attendees as well. Let me start with a broad question around how you are doing your annual planning process today. Who's involved in the process? When do you start planning? And how are you doing planning in this new world, right, where your teammates are not in the same office? Leah, do you want to take this first?
Sure, yes. So we're currently in the process of annual planning for 2021. In the current environment, of course, it's all virtual. So I think before, where we would have executive management sitting in a room together, now it's all like this on Zoom, but doing the best we can with that for sure. So really starting with the executive management team with the top level priorities for the year. And of course, they're coordinating their plans as well with one another. After that, we go into translating those top priorities into objectives that sit at the top level of the organization for different teams to then define more specifically the key results and how they contribute to make sure those objectives happen.
Got it. And typically, when do you start the planning process? How far ahead do you start the process?
Typically for us, October, November timeframe. We try to start earlier the better, but we're in full swing currently.
Got it. Thank you. Rakesh, do you want to share?
Yeah, no, so I think maybe for context, we're about a 200-person company now, very much sort of year 5 or 6 in sort of the company's gestation. With us, things are changing so rapidly that while we wanted to on one level start earlier, I think the reality is, October, November, it's exactly the same time. So for me, it's very much a planning exercise that starts now. And the way we're approaching it is we set ourselves sort of one very top level vision, almost vision as opposed to objective, like where do we want to be? And it really starts with where we want, like many startups in the audience, I'm sure we all have this aspiration to go public at a certain point in time. We've defined a time frame. And so it's almost a work back plan from the board that says, okay, if we're going to go public in, whatever year, what do we need to achieve this coming year to get to that point? And so, the executive team said, okay, this is what we think we need to do at one line, like we need to have exit level company, so a company that's ready to exit in 3 to 4 years. And therefore each of the departments to support that needs to achieve the following outcome by the end of 21. And then based on that outcome, we're now all stitching together our individual department level plans. And I think Leah's framework is exactly right. Like, what are the objectives that each department needs to achieve? And then we start stitching them together by having one-on-one Zoom calls with each relevant department. So I clearly work with marketing and with product. We start intertwining, well, if I need to achieve this, what do I need from that department? And then we go deeper and deeper. What do they expect me to deliver, et cetera. And that's kind of how we're building the planning process. And the forcing function for us, the beauty is, unlike some of my larger companies that I've worked at, here there is a very defined, there is a board meeting the first week of December and everything needs to be locked down by then. Because otherwise you go back and forth so many times, it takes forever. And so it's sort of there's a pretty clear, starting no earlier than October 1 and December 5th or whatever the date is a date that we have everything locked down. And that's the plan.
Got it. And besides where does the initial input to the annual planning process come from? Is it based on the long-term strategic plans from the board? How about anything that is from the team, even from the grassroots in the organization?
Yeah, well, let me start, and then Leah, I'll hand over to you. I think for us, there's the board's vision of we need to exit. To exit, this is what the shape of the business needs to look like at the time of exit. Whether it's a revenue number, a margin number, size of customer, the number of rough customers, but really it's sort of a very simple set of metrics, KPIs, if you will, that to be successful in an exit, this is what it needs to look like. And then based on that, for me, a lot of it came from, the CEO said, okay, here, what is it that and he's a little bit more of a, what do you think you need to achieve to get to that 3 or 4 year aspiration, right? And so for me, being kind of the tip of the spear, here's what I think we can do, from a revenue perspective. Here's the number of customers we're going to onboard. Here's the level of churn we're going to have. And you put some of those expectations there. And then based on that, you sort of cascade, well, if this is the exit plan for revenue, what does every other department need to do to support and enable? And then in addition to non-revenue impacting things like platform stability, et cetera, what are the other KPIs and objectives that the other departments have to put in place? So that's kind of how we did it. I don't know, Leah, if you had any thoughts about how you did it?
Yeah, that's interesting, and I'll be fully transparent. From my perspective as training and development specialist, I don't quite have visibility to that level of conversation. I do know that last month our board was having conversations with our executive management team to begin those top level conversations. And I know also that we're really following our new vision and mission statement that was launched for our organization mid 2020. That's kind of our North Star that I know we're chasing after. And from here, what we'll be working with each member of the C-level on is translating those top priorities into objectives and key results, so that once those priorities are clear from their perspective, how do we simplify it and make it make sense for the rest of the business, so that you can ask anyone, what's your must-do priorities for 2021? And they can see how those dots connect up to the vision and mission and what we need to achieve.
Got it. Beautiful. Beautiful. Some of our customers have actually tried approaches like asking the team to submit one idea, right? What is the one thing that every team member thinks the company should do? And they've actually had some remarkable success as well. Again, it needs to fit in with that organization's culture and whether it's even practical to get that kind of feedback that going into the process itself, into the planning process. I'm just curious of what do you guys think about something like this? Is that practical for your organizations, or is it better to start from the top and cascade down?
That is an interesting idea. I think it definitely depends on the organization that you're a part of. From my perspective, we've been working to really hone our focus and refine things to really define. We can do lots of things, and we have done lots of different things as a business over time, and we're becoming a bit more focused. So that type of generating ideas that might not align to the vision and mission at the end of the day is not where we are currently. But I could certainly see for a different type of business or a different state of maturity, how that could be an interesting way to engage people in defining the top level priorities. What do you think, Rakesh?
Yeah, I think, like you said, I think it's interesting. And I think good ideas have no natural place, whether it's the top or the bottom of an organization. They're just good ideas. For me, I probably would guide it a little to say, hey, here's the outcome that we want in some period of time, 3, 4, 5 years from now. Now, how do each of you think we should go after it? So it's a guided set of input, right? Because I think then people can pick on, identify areas, particularly with their sphere of knowledge, that gets us to that point, right?
Got it. Got it. Got it. Fantastic. Fantastic. And once you have these top level priorities for the enterprise as well as for the departments, do they stay at annual level, or at what point do you break those into quarterly goals and milestones?
I guess for me, we're at the business that we're in at our stage of growth, it's hyper growth. So we have to break it down. I don't even think quarterly is sensible. And also we focus on small and medium businesses where there's a different sort of frame, which is just rapid fire, almost consumer-like in terms of velocity. So for us, it's down to, I took it down to monthly. Weekly doesn't make sense, but monthly is about right. Because just our business has to grow month on month, right? So we just have to move. We got to move. It's kind of my philosophy. And I think, it's probably different if you're in my old world where I was an enterprise, focused company, that's where quarterly makes a lot more sense. But I think certainly SMBs, it's a monthly business. And I'm sure consumer is weekly or monthly. I don't know, Leah, how you feel about that.
Yeah, I think for our highest level objectives, we think annual feels good to provide that constant kind of North Star for people to look at and for it to remain the same. For functions like finance, we see quarterly works quite well. I think it depends on the group, and we're open and flexible with teams to not try to force people's hand on what or how specific to get at any time throughout the year, but rather thinking critically about the way your work flows and what makes sense for your team.
Got it. And that is the pattern we do see very commonly, Leah, with organizations, particularly the larger organizations. We see a pattern where the enterprise goals tend to be annual, and the departments are kind of left, the cadence of each department is left to them to define. Some have monthly, some within the same organization follow quarterly cadence. And we know of at least one organization where some departments operate on a semi-annual basis while others are on a quarterly basis. But they are aligned to this annual objective of the company. So there's clear alignment. At the same time, each department is empowered to follow the cycle that makes sense for them.
Yeah, and I would think if it's possible to define quarterly goals, I would think it's a good idea for people because planning is so important to make sure that we're successful at the end of the day. But then again, if you're on a group that's so fast moving that it can't work or doesn't make sense, it doesn't make sense to plan for things that aren't able to be planned for. That's
right.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think, from a sales and marketing perspective, monthly is absolutely how we do it. But to your both of your points, product engineering is much more quarterly, right? When are certain releases going to happen,
yes.
certain dev work, etc. And hopefully then it all ladders up.
Yep, perfect. And then once you have done this planning, right, you have set these top level priorities or annual and quarterly goals, annual goals, let's start with that. How do you make sure that there is a clear alignment of work, budget, resource allocation, projects towards these priorities? How do you do that?
That's a definite challenge. Yeah, it's a definite challenge. I do think that that's where OKRs help us because we can see the interdependencies of one team to the next. Of if this team needs to achieve this, we need to have these resources available and support there to hit the mark. And having those regular check-ins so that it's revisited and redefined and updated as you go. I think that's really important.
Yeah, I'd agree completely. For us, there's the objective for the revenue team would be to deliver, X million dollars of revenue. Underpinning that are some key results that we expect. We expect results of whether it's hiring, whether it's marketing activity, whether it's new features and functionality. And all of those key results are the only way we'll go deliver X million of revenue, right? So, that's where the OKR process actually works very, very well.
Got it. And when do, for example, when do you do budget planning as part of this process? Is it just integral as you define these objectives, or does it happen as a later step?
But at least for us, the objectives start to get very clear. And then as you double click on the what's required to hit those objectives, the asks are like, so we're in that stage right now. So we've laid out our objectives. And now, like, how many salespeople do I need? How many, sort of marketing initiatives do I need? What kind of features and functionality do I need? And then the inputs into those outcomes, those key results are what, are what the budget will then drive the budget.
Got it. And Leah, does GHG do something similar, or are these two parallel processes? Do you have any insights or visibility into that?
Typically, quarterly is what has made the most sense for us to revisit budgets and check in on those goals. So that's the cadence that we followed so far.
Got it. Fantastic. So far, you have described a process where it is defined first at annual level with input from stakeholders like board members and based on the long-term goals of the enterprise. And then you have talked about how you're breaking it down to what the various departments need to do. Even though departments might have different cadence, some may operate on a monthly basis, some may operate on a quarterly basis, and then how budget and resource allocation happens in the context of what they have to achieve. Once you have this plan, how do you go communicating? How do you roll this out to the rest of the organization, right? How far do you go in terms of setting goals, right, beyond the departments, and how do you communicate the plan to the rest of the company?
We do lots of things to try to communicate. I think clarity of plans is really one of the most important things, that once they're defined and all this thought has been put into them from a few people, we need to make sure that those few people go and talk about it again and again, and don't forget to keep referring back to those plans to make sure everyone really understands them and remembers that that's what's most important. So we do lots of internal communications at a company-wide level, but then we're always tapping on our leaders to refer back to those OKRs, whether they're annual or quarterly, to begin status updates that way. Where are we in terms of our goals? That's something that we really are trying to do better at and focus more on, so that they really stay top of mind. But I think internal communications at a broad level is important, as well as having leaders who can articulate and engage with smaller teams on understanding the plans, fulfilling the plans continuously is really important.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I think we have had a great culture around publishing and just putting it out there, right? Here are quarterly, here are the OKRs for the company, Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4, all, in a Google Sheet. And so everybody can see it. And then when you click on the objective, you can actually, it layers into KRs that are underneath it and how those are tracking. And so we have a pretty decent layer. And right now in a COVID world, we're doing it every 2 weeks, but I think we're moving back to a monthly in terms of communication to an all hands around here's what's happening, here's how we're tracking against each of the OKRs and what's going well and what's not going well. And then in my team, I'll take that specific one objective that's related to my team or most related to my team, and then going deeper on that. And here's why we are, green or red or yellow, hopefully not red, but why we're doing better and better, to achieve that outcome.
Got it. And go ahead, Leah.
Just sharing, we had an honest challenge when we first started to roll out OKRs, where some of our leaders put their objective into the tool, and there wasn't conversation that happened after that. So people could go in and see the objective described or written, but without the conversation of talking about what does this mean, why was this defined, and how does each person fit into this, and what's the expectation about what happens next in terms of setting those next level key results. That's still something that we're working on getting better at, those conversations, the reasons why, and then engaging people and setting their objectives and key results that connect to it.
Got it. And if things do end up, Rakesh, in red or yellow, how do you handle that? When do you adjust targets? When do you adjust strategy? Does it happen throughout the quarter or throughout the year? When do you do it, and how do you do it?
I think there's you have to find a balance between moving the goalpost just because it's red, right? You have to actually try and make it green and figure out why it's red. What are the steps that you can take, the corrective actions you can take? Or at some point you say, you know what, it was just the wrong objective. And for a company at our stage, you're making assumptions, things are moving super quickly, you're learning. Some things that are green are wildly green, and so maybe it wasn't a stretching enough objective, or it was too stretching, and therefore it's not feasible. So then you reset it. And I think the way we had is we reset, certainly this past year, 2020 was unique, as we can all agree. We reset, once we understood the way COVID was going to impact our business, we reset for the second half of the year. So my opinion is in a startup, resetting every quarter is doable. It just feels a bit too fast. And particularly if you're like a little bit late, I wouldn't say later stage, but a little bit more developed like we are. Probably every, twice a year is as much as you'd want to do it. It's just an opinion. Whereas if you're a brand new startup, you're learning every day and things are wildly different. It could be monthly, maybe it's quarterly then, right? But I think if I think back to, sort of large company, T-Mobile, you don't really reset. Like it's set for the year, right?
Yes. Agree. Got it. And in terms, go ahead, Leah, please.
I'm sorry. I was thinking to build on that, it requires a clear understanding of, is the issue with the goal that was set, or is the issue with the performance of the team? And while we're trying to do two things, not only help our teams perform at a high level, but also educate our teams on writing effective OKRs, we need to be really clear about that, of what the problem is. Is it both? And then how do we solve for that? Is it rewriting the goal, or is it focusing on the performance of the team?
100%.
Really well said. That's a great point. Knowing that difference. And we have seen companies handle this in two different ways, right? When you have figured out, when you diagnose the problem, or whether it's a goal or the performance of the team, some companies still stick to what the original goal was. So they don't change the goal for that quarter at least, right? Or that half of the year. While some of our customers we have seen don't want to leave that goal because it's not very motivating for the team to look at a goal that they know they're no longer chasing, right? Where do you guys fall on that side? I mean, which one does your organization do?
I think it depends. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. Go ahead, you first.
It depends, of course, on the team and the situation. And as long as there's a shared understanding about why we're making the decision we're making to change the goal or scrap the goal and write a new one, as long as really everyone's learning the same lesson, and that lesson is the lesson that's intentional, then you'll make the right choice. But it certainly depends on the situation.
I think I'd agree with that. I'd probably take it a step further. You want to be, if you're going to restate it, you want to make sure you have enough information so that when you restate it, you do it once. You don't restate every month or every quarter or every whatever, right? So I think, for us as an example, March, April were just brutal, at least for our business. COVID did not help us at all. And there was a temptation of, okay, May, we better start restating because things are changed and it's all dramatic and blah, blah, blah. And we kind of held the course and we said, look, we know that we're missing in May and June, but we're going to learn, get a sense for what the impact is going to be. And then we restated end of June. And we've been fortunate enough to have enough information at the time to where now we haven't had to restate for this entire second half.
Fantastic. So taking the time and being thoughtful, obviously makes sense.
But I think also like not punishing the team. So we did some things for the team that were doing a good job, even though they were missing the original, objective for May and June. We were like, by exception, we kind of looked after the team, both financially or emotionally, but we didn't change the goal. We just said, hey, we get it. We know that it's wrong. And don't worry about this. Focus on your individual level goal, right? And you just focus on that. And if you work your butt off to get to that individual level goal, and admittedly, sales is a little bit more numerical. Like you either hit a number or you don't. It was one of those where if I can tell that you're working on your goal and you're actually doing what you needed to do, then we'll take care of you. And we did that.
Very nice. Awesome. And once, what are the biggest gotchas you've seen in the planning process as you're doing now, right? What are the problems you run into maybe in the past that you already addressed, or you're still trying to figure out how to handle those problems?
I think
ladies first.
Thank you. One that I've seen time and time again across different organizations and teams is not involving the right people. I think it's a major pitfall when you're talking about planning. If you don't have the right stakeholders with seat at the table and a microphone to provide the right inputs to the plan to make sure it's really considering all the important factors, then that plan will more than likely not be successful. So I think, yeah, being really intentional about who's involved is really important.
I think combined with that, for me, absolutely right. Iterating, like get a plan out there, get people to throw darts at it, tear it apart, and build it again, but do it quickly, right? Take on board the feedback, understand the reasons behind the feedback. Absolutely agree. I think the thing I would complement that with is making sure you build in the world is not perfect, right? So in a perfect world, every salesperson would hit their quota and it would be perfect, right? In a perfect world, every code that is released would be 100% perfect. But the reality is none of those things are true, right? And so therefore, what you need to do is actually say X% of it will go wrong and build that into your planning so that you're not always missing by 20%, right? That you understand that the world is not perfect and you build that in either in scenarios or at least at a minimum setting objectives, because one of the things, while you want the objectives to be stretching, you want to make sure that you actually hit them or at least have a good shot at hitting them. Because the worst thing you can do is have such a big, hairy, audacious goal. And, everybody gets so demotivated because it was one of those, if the world was perfect kind of things.
Got it. Beautiful. And sometimes we have noticed customers taking a little longer in doing the planning process, right? We have noticed customers, in fact, going into the year while still in the planning mode, right? Takes like you start the quarter or the year and still in the first month, you're still finishing up your planning. Have either of you had such problems, or would you have advice for how to avoid such problems or how you manage to avoid them?
I've seen that before myself, and I think prioritizing planning is key there. And once a team is able to take it seriously, start it early, and understand the importance of it, it becomes a lot easier. But yeah, a late plan is not a very well set up plan. So any ways that you can get people to understand the importance of planning in order to be successful, yeah.
I think for me, I'm maybe a bit more rigid in my thinking. Like it's just not acceptable, right? Like this is the date. Like so for in our world, like I said, the first week of December, there's a board meeting. I'd imagine 90 some odd % of what we present will be accepted. I hope, right? But we then will have 1, maybe 2 weeks of small tweaks around the edges, whether it's in whatever department, and we just say by December 15th, that's the plan, right? It's sort of a don't accept that you can't get it done. And I think linked to that is, and I've seen this in large companies in particular, which is audacious, right? That like to have like a large company not have a plan in month 1, like is crazy. Like, how do you function that way? And to me, it's like, well, that's just unacceptable. That's the day that it's going to be locked. And whatever we know at the time, that's what we know. And we're never going to have a perfect crystal ball.
Yes, got it. That makes sense. Leah, in your case, given your organization is distributed geographically too, right, in so many countries, are there any specific things that have worked really well, or any specific challenges you had with such a distributed organization?
I think that our challenge is what we touched on earlier in communication. So we find that our intact teams, our smaller teams, are really well connected and they're collaborating effectively. But when we talk about linking from the top to the bottom of the organization, the clarity of priorities and communicating consistently down, that's our biggest challenge, because we can't get people face to face in large all hands meetings anymore to require their attention for some of those messages that come from the top. So I guess the other side of the coin there would be the strength in the intact teams, because I really do think we've remained quite strong in the smaller team perspective. So hopefully we can overcome that when we're looking at 2021 planning by having a stronger bottom-up feedback loop into those plans. So the teams, in theory, are closer, still operating really effectively. Maybe they can have stronger messages to inform the plan upwards.
Got it. And do either of you tie OKRs to individuals' performance reviews and compensation? Do either of your organizations do that, Rakesh? Maybe you can start from you.
Yeah, I guess it's for us. I mean, again, sales is implicitly like it just ladders up, right? Every salesperson has their number, and when you add them all up, it should get to the big number. So definitely to compensation, definitely to KRs, but sales is also a little bit easier. I think there's two parts to that. To me, there's two parts. One is the compensation piece, but I think there is a slightly separate thing around annual reviews, right? To me, annual reviews are a little bit more of a holistic thing. It's not just did you hit your one number, right? I think it's a little bit more about the how as well, right? So, salespeople could hit their number, but have a notoriously bad customer experience, et cetera, not a good review, right? Even if you hit your number. And so I think for me, the annual review is a little bit more all encompassing, but yeah, performance and compensation in sales is inextricably linked to did you hit your number?
Got it. But in sales, how do you manage that? Do you still have a notion of a stretch goal? And how does that connect to their comp or performance?
Yeah, no, we do. I mean, from a stretch goals, basically we just have accelerators. So I'm a big believer in sales accelerators. Every salesperson has a number, that he or she has to go hit. And if you sell 10, then you get paid your full OTE. But if you sell 12, you get paid a lot more. And if you sell less than 10, you get paid less than your OTE, right? That to me is fairly straightforward, but it's the how, right? So, we've got one lady in my team that she's just been hitting her number week in or month in, month out, done super well. And we did an exceptional promotion to her because she's not only hit her number consistently for 8-9 months or whatever it's been, but she's also just customers are delighted. She's just the behaviors, the coaching that she's providing everybody else, and so off cycle, we gave her a promotion because it was just, we didn't want to wait till the annual review cycle. But in general, if we, we're kind of a little bit larger as a company, we would have probably just waited till annual review and then done the same thing.
Got it. Leah, how does GAG do this? Is there any connection between OKRs and stretch goals and individual's performance?
Right now, we have a very soft link where it's one factor for consideration in the performance conversation and therefore in the salary increase. But it's not a very strong link and not a very rigid or structured link. It's something that I think we would like to do in the future as we just mature through the process as a company.
Got it. And this is a topic that does come up from a lot of our customers. The figuring out how close should OKRs be to individual performance, because when you look at it in the business performance context, right, OKRs about stretch goals, transparency, frequent review. While if you look at it in the individual performance context, it's not that frequent and it's not usually very transparent, right? The context, the meaning of each of these values becomes different. And trying to figure out, and most customers seem to have landed where you and Rakesh have. They look at it as one of the input into the individual performance, compensation, but then there are other factors as well, right? How did you reach the objectives becomes one of the other key factors. Living the values of the enterprise becomes another factor. So we have seen this repeatedly where 50% of the performance review contribution comes from OKRs, but then there are these other factors. All right. Lastly, I want to actually, in terms of the questions I had prepared here, I would love to actually ask you, what do you think is the most important step? If I were to start my planning today, what would you recommend is the most important step?
For me, you have to be led by the outcome of the business, right? So if your business is trying to, and then by that, I don't mean like this quarter or this year. I mean, like in the next 5 years, where do you want this business to be? Right. So if you're led in a startup world, it's a lot easier because you know what you're trying to achieve as an outcome. And if you're led by that as your North Star, then everything just sort of works back from there.
I think for me, it's the number one most important thing from my perspective is learning through this process of planning and goal setting. So taking the time to reflect and understand what plans that we made last quarter or last year didn't work out, and if not, why, and what parts of our plans were effective and successful and why that we need to keep repeating. So that process of learning and reflecting continually when making plans is really important.
I think the other thing I'd just add in is something Leah said earlier, being inclusive, right? So while we're led by that North Star of the 3, 4, 5 year vision of where we want to be, getting the input and the iteration is what's going to make this thing really work.
Great points. Great points. I've covered pretty much all the topics we want to cover. There are a couple of questions from the audience. Let me go through them. One is actually a common question that comes up, right? Not just in the planning context, but always, right, throughout the year. OKRs generally capture what are the top priorities, right? And you typically want to limit it to 3 to 5, so you're focused on really a few important things. But on a regular basis, all of us have this work that is about keeping the lights on, right? How do you balance, how do your team members balance these two? How do they avoid, or how do they make sure they're still able to focus on the key priorities and not constantly get pulled into keeping the lights on?
Go for it.
We hope that we use technology to our advantage to tackle this. So in addition to OKRs and Ally, we also have software like Jira that helps us track other work that's daily. And so by using our technology as well to say, use Jira for your more tactical work that keeps the lights on. And then of course, hopefully you can refer back to your objectives that connect to the bigger picture of the organization, that those two things work well. And then if something needs to change, then by using the tools though, we have the data at least to have those conversations. So if we're using Jira well, we have data to support a change in objectives or a change in priorities, a change in workflow or structure of the team, whatever needs to happen. But that's the approach we've taken.
I think there's a couple things for me. One is your KRs need to be set appropriately. If your KRs are ignoring keeping the lights on, then there's a problem with your KRs, right? Like at the end of the day, it's one thing to say like, and I'm a sales guy, I want to sell more and more cool stuff, right? I want lots of great product features and functionality, but the reality is we need to make sure that the product itself is working as promised and it does what it says before we start adding in new bells and whistles, right? So for me, one of the KRs has to be keeping the lights on, right? That's just, it's a must do. We can't have security breaches. We can't have all these things, right? First and foremost. Then on top of it, adding new features and functionality or whatever, right? So that's sort of part one. Part two is, and I mean this in the nicest possible way, it's about prioritizing your own work, right? The OKRs are there to guide you, but they're not going to do the day-to-day prioritization. You got to kind of do that yourself.
That's a good point. We've had teams also go through that learning process of we have objectives that we know we would like to achieve, but first we need to clean house. So let's set our objectives, focus on those things first before we can get to the more aspirational things. So it's also about being practical.
That's right. That's right. We have had even some customers allocate time. Depending on the team, right? You know that certain teams like typically operations team are very consumed by keeping the lights on. And there they might actually allocate only like 30–40% of the time to work on OKRs. And that means they might end up having just 2 OKRs, right? Not 3 or 4 like another team or employee might have. And just being cognizant of how much work a team or an individual might have to keep the lights on, you might be able to do even better upfront planning on how many OKRs or how much time they should even spend on their OKRs. Got it. And if you think about the role of OKRs in this planning process, right? What kind of difference has it made compared to how you were doing this before?
I think maybe if I contrast, I mean, I joined this company, 18 months ago, give or take. We've always used an OKR framework, but if I contrast it with some, previous companies where there was no clear line of sight from what I did or my team did and how that laddered up to the overall objective, like that piece was missing, right? Whereas now it's very easy every month or every 2 weeks, as I said, we go through as an organization and we look at, here are the 5 things that we think matter. 5 objectives that matter to the company. If you're not doing something that impacts those 5, then you should put your hand up. And so it's giving everybody clarity around, am I doing something that impacts one of those 5? And if not, I better understand how my role fits in. So for me, that's been really motivational to have everybody kind of understand how their pieces stitch together. Whereas in previous companies, like you have no idea, right? Big or small.
Yes.
I agree. I have the same experience. I just have at Gig, all I've known is OKRs, but at my past company, we didn't have them. And the transparency is the key difference.
Yep.
Got it. Fantastic. Thanks so much, Rakesh and Leah, for your time today. Really enjoyed this chat. I also personally learned a lot from this conversation. Thank you so much for your time. Before we end, do you have any closing comments?
Not from my side. Thank you for having us. It's been fun.
Yeah, no, I think for me, it's like, just make sure that your company has clarity around what you're trying to achieve. Make sure that you make it easy for your team members to know how what they're doing is going to ladder up to the ultimate outcome and objective that your company is trying to reach.
Well said. Well said. Thank you again for your time. This session was recorded, and we will make the recording also available in a couple of days. Thank you so much, and have a great day.